Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me. We are coming closer to the end of part one of a virtual tour in the country. We've been around so far, and the last 3 or 4 sessions, we focus on the way to Jerusalem and Jerusalem. We started with a decent, I believe, geographical setting to explain the city's topography and how important it was and how it was connected to the city's history. We spoke about the city of David. That's where everything started, basically. And then we went up to Temple Mount. On top of Temple Mount, we spoke about the platform itself. We spoke about the significance of it and the centrality of the temple to the Jewish world, and maybe more than just the Jewish world back then. We did not speak much about how the mountain was built. It's a man-made mountain after all, and how much efforts were dedicated to build the whole project. The plan for today, therefore, is to focus on the most important site archaeologically in Jerusalem, some will say around the country, and that would be the excavations outside the western wall and the southern steps, which were the main entrance to the temple for pilgrims. You need to understand that until 1967, the aftermath of the Six-Day War, most of the area was not excavated. We had very vague ideas about how it used to look like. Yes, we had the book of Josephus Flavius that gave us details, but everything was buried under 2,000 years of history and the layers of cities that were built one above the other. Our knowledge was less than limited about how the city used to look like. What made it possible for us today to understand what Jerusalem was like 2,000 years ago was not just the book of Josephus Flavius, but predominantly excavations. Massive excavations are taking place, and they removed more than 500,000 cubic meters of dirt just to get to the streets of Jerusalem from the days of Jesus, removing in the process more than 20 centuries of civilizations that were arranged one above the other. So the plan for today is to zoom in and speak more about the details. How was the Temple Mount built? What would be the procedure of the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem? What gates they will take to go inside? And let me say it once again, that's the only place in the country you can be so positive in saying you're walking the streets of Jerusalem just like Jesus did 2,000 years ago, and any other Jerusalemite for that purpose. I'm visitor that came to Jerusalem, not only the locals. I'm going to use, as always, the presentation on PowerPoint. I'm going to show some short videos, and I hope that technology will not be too much of a challenge. Well, let us start and let's bring up the presentation. So today, basically, we are speaking about Jerusalem. We're speaking about the area of Temple Mount. We speak about the excavations around the Temple Mount area. A few words about the Western Wall as well. We'll leave that to be the very last part of this presentation. Will take about 45 to 50 minutes. The opening slide is always the one that shows you the Judean Wilderness. And the Judean Wilderness played a very important part in Jerusalem's history as well. For the sake of our story today, all the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem from the northern countries or Babylon would used to walk down the Jordan Valley, and from Jericho would climb these mountains all the way up to Jerusalem. And even from the slide, you can tell that that was not an easy climb. It's very hot here. The festivals were scheduled, and some of them were in the heat of the summer. And that was the toughest part of the whole pilgrimage, was to climb from Jericho and make your way up to Jerusalem. Some would go along this canyon here, which is called Wadi Kel today. Many call it the Valley of Shadow of Death for some reason, I have to say, because we don't have any indication geographically where that valley used to be. Maybe used just a metaphor by the psalmist, King David. So this is the slide that you know quite well by now. That's how I choose to start all the presentations. Episode number 3 today, and we're going to visit the excavations outside the Western Wall and the Southern Steps. And by doing that, we'll speak, of course, about the way it was all built. Keep in mind, this was, still is, the largest man-made platform that was ever built 20 centuries ago. It's enormous in size, and you have to admire the skills of the people that were engaged in carrying out that project. We always speak about King Herod. Well, he was maybe the visionary. He was not the chief engineer, and he did not know how to move stones from place to place. So these heroes are unknown today by name, but of course we speak about the massive project that many people were engaged in. The time frame, excuse me, is the Roman Empire's days. We speak about Roman Judea. We speak about a king that wanted to impress not just his own people, but to impress the Roman Empire. And maybe the whole project called Temple Mount was part of his agenda to try to make a name for himself, to make a name to Jerusalem among the nations as well. And he did a good job in doing that based on what was accomplished and how much efforts were dedicated to build the area of the temple and to glorify his name and the name of Jerusalem as well. This picture is taken from the scale model of ancient Jerusalem. We're going to speak about this one in our coming lecture to bring the whole series to conclusion. You see the facade of the entrance to the temple on top of Temple Mount. We need to give you some basic data about how it looked like, what were the measurements. Let's speak about the motivation. Well, number one, and Josephus Flavius, the famous historian, always tells us about Herod's approach and Herod's will to make more money for the kingdom. And since many of these pilgrims that came to Jerusalem brought money with them, and by the way, not just Jews, the better facility you provide, more people will come. And it's possible that building the harbor of Caesarea as one of the largest harbors in the world back then was to provide a decent entry to the country, and an excellent road led people up to Jerusalem. So to build the Temple Mount and at the same time to build the harbor of Caesarea, it was part of the same plan. More people come to visit, again, more money for the kingdom. This was always one of the main reasons that Herod did anything. Number two is to, as I said earlier, to increase the fame of Jerusalem, not just among the Jews, but among the pagans as well. True, Herod would not be qualified to be a Jewish man by any criteria known back then, but he was the king of the Jews, and he had every interest in the world to represent the Jewish people to the Romans in a more favorable way, and that was part of it, know that. But also, if you are leading the Jewish world, and you're leading the Jewish world all around the world, that gives you much influence away from your kingdom as well. Because people that live in Rome, Jews, or live in Babylon, or live in Antioch or Alexandria, basically you are maybe loyal to the country that you live in, but your religious existence is connected to Jerusalem, which means if Herod is going to build such a nice building to get the attention of so many people around the world, it will increase his influence and his significance among other nations. Because if you're a Jew who lives in Rome, some of your loyalty and some of your admiration will go to the king that built such a magnificent temple, and that was a way to get more political power in other countries as well by building such an amazing project. Well, among the Jews, of course, popularity was always a challenge, and when he offered the Sanhedrin to start working on this project, the Sanhedrin was confused. They did not understand why somebody that the Jews basically hated and considered to be an enemy and not really a legitimate king would do something so nice for the Jewish people. They did not like the idea at first, and they're very hesitant how to answer the request. The other reason, or the main part of the main motivation, was of course to get more influence in Rome itself, because when Roman Jews, and we speak about hundreds of thousands, will view Herod as a political figure, that will give him more influence and more importance among Roman politicians in the Roman Senate as well, and will have the Jews get more influence among high Roman circles. That's how the platform looked like when you see that from above. I give you the measurements in the metric system, and you do whatever you want to convert that to your system. But it was a rectangular structure shaped more like a trapezoid. The western wall was 485 meters long. The northern wall, that nothing was left from, was 315. The eastern wall, 460, and the southern one was 285. The temple building stood on top, opposite to the eastern gate, and you do know the two possible locations. I chose to place the temple here in the center of Temple Mount. The rest was the Gentiles' court, and on the southern side, the largest colonnaded building in the Roman Empire, that was the Basilica or the Royal Stoa, that provided an indoors marketplace and the hall of judgment for the city magistrates as well. So that's how the complex looked from the top. And let's go into some details, because the details are absolutely amazing. When you read the data, that really brings a lot of appreciation for the king himself and the Roman skills and engineering. It's a picture from the model, and what we call the excavations will be part of the Western Wall. Today you can walk the full length of it along the Western Wall tunnel because all this is built up by the Muslim quarter of today. So walking along the Western Wall, you have to go under living quarters, but you may today. Today you can see part of the bridge that connected the two parts of town. This one is called Robinson's Arch. One stone is still standing here and the foundations are here. And of course the southern steps that led to the two main entrances and exits from the temple, and that will be the entrance for the pilgrims. So speaking about the Western Wall southern step excavations, this is the part of town that we are talking about. Building a temple without building decent infrastructure was pointless. Think about building a huge stadium in a town center without a single parking spot and without any decent access roads. You beat your own purpose basically, and for that reason it wasn't just a temple building. Number one, you had to have access roads that went through the province of Judea to Jerusalem and in Jerusalem. You had to have bridges to try to ease the topographical challenges. When you're coming from the Mount of Olives on your way to Temple Mount, you need to go deep down to the Kidron Valley and then climb a very steep climb. If you build a bridge that over or crosses over the Kidron, that will make it a lot easier. Same thing with the upper city. In order to go from the upper city into the temple, you either take a bridge or you go down to the Central Valley and then you climb. So we speak about a decent road system, intersections as well, I kid you not, intersections in order to ease the flow of people and just provide decent services to those people that came to Jerusalem. So the whole country was changing in a way. It wasn't just the temple, it wasn't just Jerusalem. The infrastructure was covered, the whole land of Judea, to encourage more people to come. And of course, there was a certain procedure for pilgrims, and not only pilgrims came to Jerusalem, most people came for the daily business, even on top of Temple Mount. But if you came as a pilgrim, there was a certain ritual how to approach the temple, which included cleansing, water cleansing, ritual cleansing, and you have to provide hundreds or maybe thousands of such facilities, and these were found, many of them, and I will tell you later on. But the Bible tells us in Acts chapter 2 that 3,000 people were baptized in Pentecost Day. We know exactly what had happened, and it's part of the excavations. A sophisticated water system for the temple, oh boy, it was. Well, it will take a whole presentation to explain how sophisticated was indeed the water system for the temple in Jerusalem. Just to give an example, they had to carry water from springs about 15 to 16 miles away outside Bethlehem. But since the source of water was 40 meters above the temple's courtyard, they had to design a certain path for the aqueduct, and they had to maintain a certain angle that was 0.1 degree, which means that although it's only 15 to 16 miles away, the aqueduct crossed an area of 42 kilometers, 26 miles, just to maintain that certain slope. So we speak about another high level of water engineering, and you understand how much water was needed for the temple. Number one, the priests used to live there. Every division, there were 24 divisions, came to serve in the temple 2 weeks every year, and these were the living quarters, so water was needed. Think about the amount of water just to wash away the blood from the altar after every day of sacrifices was over. That will take a lot of water as well. They were able to count 34 gigantic cisterns under the platform, and that will be part of the water system of the temple area. So the water system was extremely sophisticated and had to be like that. Otherwise, you would not be able to function or to provide all the needs of the pilgrims and the other visitors that came to Jerusalem. We spoke about a sophisticated water system. It wasn't just bringing water from far away. It's turning the whole city to be a catchment area. It doesn't rain much in Jerusalem. If you compare that to some, I guess, states in the US of A or parts in Europe, Jerusalem receives about 20 inches to 25 inches of rainwater every year. However, it pours down in a very short season, and it's never really a drizzle, it pours. So if the streets of the city are paved with stone, you can collect that water. You don't lose much for evaporation. You don't lose much water that trickles through the soil and goes down to feed the groundwater. If you can collect rainwater from the rooftops and the streets and the courtyards and channel that into cisterns and cleansing facilities, you solve the problem. And therefore, the whole of the city was also designed to be a catchment area, once again, to collect enough water to supply the needs of the masses that came to Jerusalem, especially in the holidays. You need to have marketplaces because most of these pilgrims would not carry the sacrificial animal with them all the way from Rome. It may be damaged during the journey. You don't want to carry stuff with you and feed it along the way. And therefore, you used to buy your sacrificial animal in the markets of Jerusalem. Think about the amount of even the noise from the market. The smell was not that pleasant either. But Josephus Flavius tells us that one Passover, they've offered the 250,000 lambs. It was a lamb for a family because the Passover sacrifice was the family's meal as well. We speak about millions. Think about how busy were the priests just to slaughter the animals and hand it back to the patriarch of the family so he can roast it someplace in town and carry it back to the family that's camped either around the city or inside the city to have the meal. So you do understand, in order to accommodate the masses, you have to be very, very efficient. And for that reason, everything had to be very carefully planned and designed. Some other data, if I may, we spoke about the dimensions of the walls. The highest point, 51 meters, that would be around 180 feet, was the southern eastern corner that we also call the pinnacle of the temple. The width of the retaining walls on average is close to 17 feet. The largest stone in the wall is in the western wall. It's about 500 tons. That would be 10 tanks. How do you carry it out, or how do you carve it out from the bedrock? And how do you convey such a huge stone from the quarry to the construction site? And how do you place it so perfectly well with lifting it, or maybe without? A Roman crane could lift about 50 tons. We speak about pulleys and tripods and lots of people. But what if you need to carry or lift a stone which is heavier? Few cranes had to work in concert. Now the problem is, unless you lift the stone in the very same tenth of a second, it won't work. So once again, this is a demonstration of a very high level of stone masonry and just logistics that the local engineers had. Although we speak about Judea and Herod employed locals, no doubt, everybody was sharing the Roman technology. And maybe there was one school of engineers in Rome and Rome was willing to share its technology. Everything was done by the locals, but everything was based on Roman technology that they gained either in studying in Rome or maybe participating in other projects and then gradually get the experience. Some other pieces of data, but again, these are absolutely amazing. As we said, the largest ones in the, 34 water systems on the platform. The largest ones contain 12,000 cubic meters. That will be a huge amount of water just for the temple needs. It wasn't the city water reservoir, just for the temple. When they filled up some of the spaces under the platform, the total amount of dirt they were using comes to 750,000 cubic meters of dirt, which is once again absolutely amazing. When you speak about how much stone they had to carve out and to chisel so nicely just to pave the platform, that would be 54,000 cubic meters of rock had to be carved out in order to do that. And the thickness of the stones were a little over a feet. So once again, demonstrates carrying stones from quarries far away. No quarries in the Jerusalem area would be sufficient enough in order to provide that amount of stones of different qualities, by the way, different stones and different qualities. Some are harder to chisel and some are softer. And you had to know which stone you want to use for what purpose. When you speak about the retaining walls, they required a total of 115,000 cubic meters. Look at that. There were porches and porticos around the courtyard with a total of 700 columns. Every column weighted close to 10 tons. You do understand the efforts here to move them from place to place and then to bring them to the upright position. When you think about the stones that cover the porticos, that will be the total amount or the total space, 234,000 square feet. Think about it, compare that to the places that you live in. The Royal Stoa was the largest building in the Roman Empire, a colonnaded building, which was the indoors marketplace. It was 200 yards long, 40 yards wide, and again, 162 columns were supporting the roof that was made not of timber, but of stone, which means that the columns had to be more massive. It had to be a monolith because they were carrying something very heavy on top. If they were carrying something lighter, it could be made of slices, pieces, one above the other that's used to plaster. But if you carry something heavy, it will be one massive piece of stone. Stone that were used just by sizes, smaller stone that you can easily carry by a tripod and put maybe a few people together, 105,400. Think about making the statistics and counting the stone. That would be a major job as well. Large stones, all right, that would be the dimensions, about 100,000, predominantly in the retaining wall. And very large stones, 15,000 very large stones that you need to use more than one crane to lift and to carry. Again, when you look at those details here, once again, it brings this appreciation to those skills. Has to be something that we have to admire. Well, I try to use my very limited graphic designer skills here to try to explain. You cannot see it in 3D, unfortunately, so try to focus and maybe that will make some sense. Today, when you're standing outside the Western Wall, you see the blocks of the Western Wall. That will be correct to any wall that you're looking at when you speak about this man-made box called Temple Mount. You do not see what happens behind. What happens behind is that the bedrock is climbing very steeply from the city of David, which is down here, all the way up to the top of Mount Moriah. This is Mount Moriah. The question would be, how do you bridge the gap between the platform, all right, and the bedrock? Keep in mind, when you see the Temple Mount for today, you see it from the side, you see the retaining walls, you don't know what happens behind. So for that reason, I did that little sketch to show you. If you look at the Temple Mount from the south, for example, the same challenges. The hillsides are very steep, and somehow you need to bridge the gap between the platform and the hillsides. All right, so this is looking from south. That would be the western retaining wall. And this is the eastern wall. The highest spot, the pinnacle of the temple, is here. That will be the central valley. This is the Kidron Brook. So if the platform looks like that, and this will be the bedrock, the question is, what happens here? How do you fill those spaces, either with dirt, or maybe with some other material, or maybe there was another option? So these were some of the challenges that the engineers were facing. Oops. This one tries once again to demonstrate something which I did my best. Well, if you could see behind the western wall, and if you could see the bedrock, you would also see those arches that were built one above the other and one next to the other. And that's how the other side looks like. Not all of it. It's filled with dirt about all the way down here. But the bigger the gap is between the platform and the bedrock, you'll find arches basically and not the filling. So it was all hollow. We speak about a hollow mountain. When you stand on top of Temple Mount, and if you could see through the floor, which you couldn't, what you see basically would be huge spaces, one above the other, one next to the other. That's how the project was built. And the question is why? What are a few reasons? But let's try to explain something, how they accomplish this level of precision like you see here. Look at these stones. That's one gigantic stone resting on top of some other smaller stones. Sometimes you can't really tell where one ends and one begins. Look at the line here. This will be the line between two stones, and this is 2,000 years after this project was completed. It still stands in such a great condition. Well, they scanned the wall. This is a segment from the southern western corner. And what they were able to identify that between every two big stones, they found small pieces of lead, hundreds of pieces made of lead, which led them to the following theory. When you bring a block to the quarry, from the quarry to the construction site, and you want to place it so nicely and so precisely above this one, you lift up the stone with a crane, or maybe two or three, but then when you place it and you missed, well, you cannot move that. And for that reason, on top of big stones, they were placing hundreds of small bolts made of lead. You lower the next one very carefully, and it is resting on these bolts made of lead. You can still push it right and left until you get to the right position, and the heavy weight of the next stone will crash them. Well, it's a theory, it's a possibility, makes sense in many ways. They did not find any pieces of lead between stones, one next to the other, only stones one above the other, and only the bigger stones. Well, sounds like a decent theory, not that we know for sure that that's how it was done, but it makes a lot of sense. Well, temple was built on air, and we need to focus on the reasons why. Number one, you want to reduce the pressure on the retaining walls. You can build this man-made box basically around the bedrock and stuff everything with dirt and then build a platform. If you do that, the pressure on the retaining walls can be so hard that they may collapse. And by the way, the retaining walls were built without any connecting material. We speak about huge blocks of stones, as you saw. The question is why? Why not smaller stones and connecting material? I'll address that in a minute. And therefore, to reduce the pressure and to save on building material, it was basically built, some of it on arches. The second reason was storage. The temple needed a lot of storage, not just the water reservoirs, but think about the tithes and offerings that were given to the priests. Some of it was in the form of gifts and offerings, but some of it was food, and food had to be stored for a long time. The temple had a salt chamber because every sacrifice had to be offered with salt. And of course, if you want to store food for a long time, especially meat, you better salt it. So the temple needed huge reservoirs and huge storerooms, and that was another reason why it was built in such a way. So we speak about storage in those huge hollow spaces. And there was another reason, the most important one maybe, and that was the purification reason. Well, I'm going back to this slide to try to explain something. You go to Leviticus 14, the Bible speaks about the requirement to purify people that are not purified. If something happened and you're not clean and you need to cleanse yourself, you need to do that. The question is how exactly, what will be the procedure? Because the Torah, and we speak about Deuteronomy, gives us principles and doesn't give us the details. The details were developed over the years by Jewish sages, by Jewish rabbis. The idea is that that's what the Bible says, but let us add the details. When it comes to cleansing, it doesn't give us any details. And therefore, these are traditions that were developed over the years. And the idea of cleansing, or mikveh, as it's called in Hebrew, came to its peak in the days of the Second Temple. You don't even know if it was a procedure done in the First Temple's days. Most likely it was, but you could not find any such facility from the days of the First Temple. We found thousands all around the country of cleansing facilities from the days of the Second Temple, especially around Temple Mount. So yes, I think that the term in Christianity for that is baptize and baptism, but it's not quite the same. You go to the mikveh whenever there is a need, not once in a lifetime procedure or not under unusual circumstances, whenever you think that you were contaminated. And the ultimate reason for contamination are dead bones. You need to cleanse yourself, let alone if you go up to the temple. And for that reason, by the temple were lots of cleansing facilities. But there was a problem. The ultimate source of contamination are dead bones. Now, in the excavations outside the southern wall, they found some graves that went back to the days of the First Temple. Maybe there were some people that were buried on the slopes of Mount Moriah, which means if you build a temple on top of ancient graves, you are defiling the whole mountain. And since the Bible is not addressing the issue, the sages had to step forward to give a solution. And here is the solution. The impurity is only traveling, so to speak, through solid rock and not through air, which means although you may have some dead bones or a graveyard on the slopes of Mount Moriah, if there is some air between those ancient graves and where the priests are officiating, that will be kosher. And therefore the temple had to stand on air, so to speak, in order to deal with that issue as well, the issue of purity. So these were the three reasons why the Temple Mount was built in a certain way. Let me bring up a short video here, which I hope that you will enjoy. And this one will speak about, what is it going to, just a minute, give me a second here to try to get to the right location. Okay, so here we are, and see if this is working. Just a minute, I'm going to, nope, excuse me for a minute. It's not what I meant to do. Bear with me, please. I'll be with you in just a second. Okay, this will be 1, and this will be 2. I'm going to be an expert in doing that. If I keep doing it for a long enough time, that will be great fun. So let's see. if I can do that. Just a minute once again. Okay, so something is not really working. It looks like a bummer, but there has to be a way. There has to be a way, so let's see. How about now? Look at these stones in front of you. Look at the sizes of them. You do understand the weight of them. Even the smallest one weighs about 2.5 tons. And all these were found on the ancient streets of Jerusalem during the excavation that started in 1968. Until 1968, the streets of Jerusalem were high above our heads. The ancient street that we are standing on was covered by 2,000 years of ruins. Different civilizations made Jerusalem their home and keep the building up on top of ancient cities, one above the other. Jerusalem is a gigantic tale, a man-made hill made of layers of people that lived above people that preceded them. When you look at the sizes of these stones, you do understand the reason. What will be easier for you to do when decision was made to build a new town on the ruins of the old one? To carry these stones away from here, or to cover everything and build a new town above the ancient ruins? It looks like covering would be a lot easier than to deal with the heavy weight of the stones, to move them aside or use them as a building material once again. And therefore, the end result was layers of cities one above the other. It took more than 20 years for the excavators to remove the 20 centuries of ruins, and you know how you work in such a dig. You may start with a bulldozer, but then you go down to a toothbrush. The deeper you go, the more careful you have to be. And finally, about 25 years ago, after massive work that engaged hundreds of people, they arrived and they got to the streets of Jerusalem from the days of Herod, from the days of Jesus. This is indeed one of the most fascinating experiences that anybody can experience in Jerusalem, because you do see the ancient streets, you do see the ancient stones, and you can say one of the few places in the country beyond any doubt. We are walking the streets of Jerusalem. We are walking the stones that Jesus did and all the other pilgrims that came to town. So this was Herod in Jerusalem, if you may call it like that, because King Herod was behind this big project, which is called Temple Mount today by us, which is the largest man-made platform. 10,000 people were engaged in the project, 10,000 professional stonemasons, 1,000 priests were trained especially to build the temple building that was built on top of the platform, but they had to do almost everything outside the complex. They were not permitted to use any tools made of iron on top of Temple Mount. Iron symbolizes war. The temple is a house of peace. Everything that was part of the temple building was prepared by the priests outside. Please make a distinction between Mount Moriah, which is the bedrock. Temple Mount will be the man-made box that covers Mount Moriah, and the temple building will be the building that was standing on top of Temple Mount. Okay, I hope that it went relatively well and you were able to follow some of it. Now let me say just one thing, because when I'm guiding groups in this part of town, sometimes people ask me a question saying, yes, but Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple, so how come Temple Mount is still standing? Well, you're absolutely right. Jesus in Luke 19 looked at the building and proclaimed judgment on the temple, but we do not know that that includes all of Temple Mount. The temple building, not a stone was left. Everything was set on fire, not a single stone was left on the temple building. The Temple Mount is still standing, so there's no contradiction between what you see and what you read in Luke 19, so this is also important to know. Let's go back now to the presentation and carry on. So we spoke about the reasons why the temple was built in a certain way, and I hope that it makes some sense to you. Because when you come and see everything, only you see the retaining walls in front of you. It's hard to see what happens behind. Well, we spoke about the sizes of the stones, and we spoke about how big they were. I need to answer the question why it was built with huge stones and not smaller ones. Well, the connecting material will be mortar. And in order to produce mortar, you have to burn a lot of limestone. The softest limestone is called chalk. It was quarried in some places in the lowland of the Shefela. But in order to make mortar, you have to burn limestone. And when that stone comes under 1,000 degrees centigrade of heat, the moisture evaporates, it simply explodes, crumbles, and that will be one main ingredient to produce our plaster. Problem is we don't have that amount of timber in the country. Judea is very poor with timber and natural forests, and in order to save some of that material, they decided to use huge blocks and not small one with mortar. Josephus does tell us that two stones were usually connected by little hooks that were hammered almost into those stones to keep them close to one another, but that was from the inside, as he says, and we have no access to the other side right now. It is all in the hands of the Muslim Waqf, and of course they will not permit any kind of excavations, any kind of research on the other side. So maybe they were connected somehow, but it was not as solid, not as strong as it would be if you were using mortar. The other thing that happened was very interesting. In the process, basically, of building everything, the Roman engineers will not build on ancient ruins. As we said, usually, people used to build towns one above the other, not the Roman engineers. And therefore, if you want to build those massive retaining walls, and you want to make sure that they'll be totally solid, you have to make sure that bedrock, when you place the first layer, is perfectly level. Because if bedrock was not perfectly leveled, the whole structure will not hold on. And as you saw for yourself, we speak about 2,000 years now, and most of the retaining walls are still standing. In the process of removing everything to go down to bedrock and level it, the Roman engineers also moved everything that was there, including some artifacts from Solomon's temple, including some of the foundations of Solomon's temple, almost no doubt, Solomon's palace maybe. And therefore, in the process of preparing the ground to build Temple Mount, everything that was in the area was removed by the Roman engineers to go down to the bedrock and to build from bedrock. That's how everything looks like today. And this line of stones, this heap of stones goes all the way along the western wall. By the way, these stones belong to the top. They were knocked down into the valley by the Roman soldiers after conquering Temple Mount in the process of its destruction. So if you came to visit Jerusalem a few days after Rome's conquest, you will see that the top of the platform was standing naked, and the wall that was built around the courtyard was simply the stones were knocked off into the valleys all around, and that's how they were found, almost in situ, during the excavations. Other part of the day is going to take us now to the southern steps. So we're going to walk around the southern western corner, and we're going to ignore these two with your permission, and we're going to speak about the southern steps, and that will be the main entrance to the temple for the pilgrims and the pilgrims only. Some of these tales are genuine, and you can say beyond any doubt that when Joseph and Mary brought baby Jesus from Bethlehem for his dedication in the temple, they climbed these very stairs, yes, no doubt whatsoever. That's where Peter was addressing the crowd, and Jesus on his way to Jerusalem into the temple area would have walked these stairs as well. The staircase is leading basically to the southern wall, and the southern wall had two sets of gates on it. One part of a lintel that goes back to the Second Temple's days is still standing in situ. This was not filled with stones, and you see these stones are much smaller, much later. That will be one of the gates, only half of it, because the current wall of Jerusalem starts right here, the 16th century one, blocking everything behind that. Well, pilgrims always enter from south, and we need to explain why south. Well, number one, when the first temple was built in Solomon's days, the only access was coming from south because the city itself was south of Temple Mount. Mount Moriah, keep in mind, Psalms 48, Mount Zion/Moriah, on the side of the north, the city of the great king. So you enter from south. In the days of the second temple, the city was growing to cover areas that were higher in elevation than Mount Moriah, which means if you want to go to the temple from the west, the upper city, you're walking down hills. When you're coming from the Mount of Olives, you're walking down hills. Coming from north, down hills again. There's only one direction that you're coming to the temple, climbing with your face lifted as you should when you go to the place of worship, and that will be south. And therefore, regardless what part of the country you came from, everybody was circling the mountains of Jerusalem if you came as a pilgrim in order to climb from the city of David, to climb from the south. Some of them may have gone all the way down to the pool of Siloam and cleansed themselves here. And after the cleansing, will climb that valley to go up to the Temple Mount area. It doesn't matter as long as you approach the temple coming from south. And before you did go to the temple, you had to cleanse yourself. Let me show you just an example of one of those cleansing facilities, how they used to look like, and see if I can bring up another video segment. So bear with me for just a second and see if that can work. May or may not. I'll be with you in just a minute and see if we can bring that up and play that little video segment. It doesn't really work. So well, let's see once again. Once again, I'm sorry for the confusion here, but I think that you are going to enjoy that. And for that reason, I thought that I should try to demonstrate, try to show you that. And let's see if this is working. Making my way downstairs into one of the hundreds of cleansing facilities, which are called mikveh, around Temple Mount. Before you go up to the temple, you need to bring yourself up to the highest level of purity. That was done by a certain ritual, which included immersing yourself in a mikveh, which was a cleansing facility. Hundreds of those were found around the Temple Mount area, and this one is in a very good shape. Men and women alike would go down to cleanse themselves as they made their way up to the temple, not in the same place, obviously, there was some kind of separation. You see, the staircase is divided into two. You're going down the right-hand side before you cleanse yourself, and after you complete the procedure, you're climbing up on the other side, making sure that you leave no trace of impurity for the visit of the temple. And then, very carefully not to touch any unclean object, you're making your way up to the Temple Mount area. The Bible speaks a lot about purity. The purity is a major issue in the Jewish world even today. When you go to the book of Leviticus chapter 17, Leviticus chapter 14, the Bible speaks about the necessity to purify people that were desecrated. Well, as I said earlier, the details are not really mentioned in the Bible, but that would be the procedure to go to a mikveh. And this one was in a very nice shape that was found. So for that reason, I chose to show this one to you. But it wasn't the only one. Well, here's another one that was closer to the Temple Mount itself. Same principle, same idea. This one is taken from above. It was indoors, all of it. You see the level of plaster, how high it went, and everything here was containing water. The ritual for today, and maybe those traditions are going back to the days of the Second Temple, it has to be a water container that carries more than 200 gallons of water, but it had to be filled naturally and not manually. Once again, you see this dividing line, right, dividing the staircase into two. So we found hundreds of those outside the southern steps and the southern gates. That's how it looks like today, a triple gate, but this is from the Muslim days. That's how it looked like most likely back then. Entrance was from this flight of stairs and exit from the other ones. It's called the Gates of Hulda. And Hulda was a prophetess who lived in Jerusalem in the days of King Josiah. Maybe someplace around here, and that's why the gates were named like that. But that means that her tomb was known, even the days of Herod, all right? To name those, the Hulda gates that Josephus mentions. So it looks like the place, the burial place of Hulda was well known among the locals, even centuries after the prophetess died. So you enter from one side, exit on the other side. Think about going into a stadium. You go under the royal store into the courtyard. People that came to Jerusalem and were mourning, they will go the other way around. So when you're climbing and somebody is coming downstairs, you know to stop next to them and to offer your condolences. That was a sense of unity and a sense of family, very important when it comes to celebrating the holidays in Jerusalem. That's how it looks on the model that we're going to speak about next time. And that is most likely the tomb of this prophetess Hulda that was located someplace around here. So all these used to be those cleansing facilities or the mikvehs. That's where they were found. By the way, if somebody decided to save some shekels and not to go to the cleansing place, he may defile the whole mountain. And for that reason, on both sides of the entrance, priests were standing. Jars at their feet filled with water mixed with the ashes of their red cow. Keep in mind, you need that to bring yourself to the highest level of purity. And they were holding hyssop branches in their hands, and they will dip and sprinkle the people as they were walking by. So even if you decided not to go to cleanse yourself, this is a personal matter. This is a private issue between you and your maker. You're not fooling anybody if you're not going to the mikveh. But to be on the safe side, the priest would do that for you, sprinkling holy water, if you wish, on you as you're going inside the temple's area. Well, this is just to show you what we saw earlier. And what we covered was the southern wall, the western wall, and part of the southern steps. Before we move any forward, once again, a short video segment I'd like to bring up to you. And I hope that that will help also to understand what was the place that we visited. Now let's see. Thank you for your patience. I'm always kind of wondering, is this working, yes or no? Well, it should. It should give me just a minute. All right, give me just a minute. We'll bring it up once again. One way or the other, that will work. When you plan to build such a massive project like Temple Mount in Jerusalem, you need to also consider very carefully the infrastructure. There'd be no point to build a place that could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people unless you provide them decent roads and decent water reservoirs, and the temple had to have its own water system, and people need to be comfortable to walk up the mountains of Jerusalem, so you have to police the highways as well. It wasn't just the building. Maybe even the harbor in Caesarea was designed in order to accommodate more people and aspire to be the real center for the Jews around the world, because back in the days of Herod, the days of Jesus, about 50% of the Jewish population did not live in Judea. Yet many people came, and they came in the Jew times. So building just the Temple Mount without all the other facilities would not be good enough. And therefore the temple was only one part of the project that lasted for decades. In the excavations in the early 90s, they came across a flight of stairs, which were the entrance to the temple for pilgrims and for pilgrims alone. When you look around you, the mountains of Jerusalem, you do see that the mountains are higher than where we are standing. And therefore, if you approach the temple going down hills, that will be disrespectful. And for that reason, the only direction that you're actually absolutely climbing when you approach the temple is coming from south, which made south the main direction for the pilgrims to approach the temple. Before you go to the temple, you have to cleanse yourself, and therefore they built hundreds of cleansing facilities close to the Temple Mount area. And I can tell you beyond any doubt, when the Bible said that 3,000 people were baptized in Pentecost Day, most of them right here. That was the only place in town that had enough facilities to accommodate that many people in one afternoon. And then, after you clean, you come to the final flight of stairs and you make your way into the temple. Okay, we just summarized what we spoke about already. So let's just carry on. We are very close to bring it to conclusion. And we're going to take you now to see the Western Wall for just a minute and say a few words about the Western Wall. Keep in mind the Western retaining wall of Temple Mount and the holiest place for the Jewish people today. But also keep in mind that where the platform is standing, it's standing on top of 12 other layers of stones about this size that we go all the way down to the road. So in this part of the Western Wall, they did not do any kind of excavations to go all the way down. But lo and behold, as we speak, they are doing that. So under the platform, they were able to unearth the whole subterranean part of the Western Wall. And when they will open the project, people will have access to come to the Western Wall on two different levels. The ancient one will go all the way down to the first one and on bedrock, which keep in mind is about 12 layers under this one. And the prayer plaza of today, it will also function in the future. So it's not just the archaeology, it's also to accommodate more people, just like it was on top of Temple Mount. They want to do the same today to bring more people to the Western Wall. And by opening an underground platform, if you wish, which is the most authentic one, they'll be able to accomplish that as well. So the last video I'll try to bring for you will be the one of the Western Wall. And let's see if we can do that. So once again, please bear with me for a minute. I'll bring that up once again. Try at least to bring that up and to see if we can do that one way or the other. Okay, that should be it. Enjoy. Well, here is the Western Wall in Corona days. The platform is divided to sections to accommodate only a few people. Try to keep social distancing here is not easy, but they try. There's always somebody who comes by the wall. It's always busy. It's open 24/7, and anybody is permitted to come and spend some time. No rules, no regulations. You can come every day if you want to. You can come once in a lifetime, but not visiting at all. There's no requirement in the Jewish law to come and see the Western Wall. We speak about traditions here. We don't speak about anything that is biblical. Many people know that this is the holiest place for the Jewish people, which is indeed the case, but it wasn't always like that. The holiest place and the only one called holy in the Bible is Mount Moriah, which is on top of that wall. The Western Wall where the temple was standing was just a retaining wall for the man-made box called Temple Mount that was built in the days of King Herod the Great and stood during the days of Jesus as well. After the destruction of Jerusalem at AD 70, Jews were limited. They could not come to see the city and sometimes not even view it from a distance. When opportunity presented itself and they were able to come, they would take whatever they could get. They will go to the Eastern Wall, they will go to the Southern Wall. The first written evidence that we have that the Western Wall is the chosen one is given to us in 1488 by a Jewish sage who came to visit Jerusalem, and he speaks about the possibility the Jews have now to go to the Western Wall. This is the preferred one because of one main reason. It's the closest one to the Holy of Holies of the Old Temple than any other retaining wall. So the reason why the Western Wall is the holy place for the Jewish people today is because we aspire to go as close as we can to the Holy of Holies, and that will be closer to the Western Wall than to any other retaining wall. Okay, folks, there is more to it, I have to admit, but once again, the time is running short. Well, that will bring our presentation today to a conclusion, and I hope that it added another layer to your comprehension of the whole big topic called Jerusalem. And here is when we, just to show you a few things from the Western Wall Tunnel. Those of you that have been to town, maybe you walk through the tunnel. It's sometimes optional, sometimes must, all depends on how big is the group. Only about half a year ago, they were able to identify and unearth a section of a theater. Josephus Flavius mentions a theater, but not in that location. It's leaning on the Western Wall, basically. It was a small theater called an Odeon, something like a private theater. Maybe it was a theater in a residence of a rich Jewish family. We do not really know because this is the last place that you will look for a theater. And Josephus says there was one in town, but not that close to the Temple Mount. So maybe it was a wealthy individual space, maybe an open plaza. Maybe that would be like a small gathering place. Time will tell, they're working on it. And we'll see, never a dull moment. Always things happen when it comes to the excavations around Temple Mount. Well, this is time to say thank you and to thank you once again for joining me. And as you see, each time we are able to add another layer and another one. And I hope that you're blessed by the information that you are receiving. Next time, we're going to meet in a few days. We are going to speak about the scale model of Jerusalem, and that will be to connect those dots together and to bring part one of our virtual to the conclusion with visiting the Israel Museum. That's where the model is located today. Be safe back home, and please exercise social distancing and take good care about yourselves. As long as we are fighting together this pandemic, we need to be careful, and may the God of Israel richly bless you all. Bye-bye.